For more than 4 decades, it was the most trusted name in American home improvement, built on public television, funded by donations, and deliberately kept away from the kind of commercial deals that turned other shows into billboards. Then Roku bought it for $97 and $8 million in cash. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how this old house went from a crumbling $17,000 Victorian in Boston to a nearly $100 million media property, and why every host departure, every sponsor scandal, and every ownership change along the way was quietly shaping the show you watch today. It was 1979. The country was 18 months out from an oil crisis. Energy bills were crushing families, and a whole generation of Americans had started looking at the rotting Victorian houses in their neighborhoods and asking a question nobody on television was answering. Can we fix these ourselves? Russell Morash was a producer at WGBH, the Boston PBS affiliate, and he had an idea that most of his industry peers thought was too boring to put on air. He wanted to film the actual renovation of an actual house. No shortcuts, no Hollywood staging, no fake drama, just the work. He found the house in Dorchester, a neighborhood in South Boston that was not exactly a prestige address in the late 1970s. The property was a Victorian-era home, built around 1860, that had fallen apart over the decades. The purchase price was $17,000. The building needed everything: foundation work, plumbing, electrical, the roof, the walls. It was a wreck. Morash brought in a builder named Bob Vila to host, and a carpenter named Norm Abram to handle the woodworking. Neither of them were television personalities. Vila was a working contractor. Abram was a craftsman who had been doing trim work and cabinetry his whole career. When the cameras rolled on February 20, 1979, nobody in the room had any reason to believe this would last past the first season. The show's debut on WGBH was watched closely because it was genuinely different from anything else on television. It moved at the pace of real work. Problems appeared mid-episode and weren't resolved until the following week. Budgets ran over. Subcontractors showed up late. The host sweated through his shirt. Viewers found it completely hypnotic. Local ratings broke records. By 1980, PBS picked it up for national distribution, and the show aired coast to coast for the first time. The Emmy Award came in 1983, Outstanding Talk and Service Series. And at that point, this old house stopped being a local experiment and became a genuinely national institution. And if you think that was surprising, stay with me, because this next part is why the whole story matters. Nobody who watched this old house in the 1980s would have predicted that Bob Vila, the face of the entire operation, would be gone by the end of the decade. Vila was charismatic, knowledgeable, and over the course of 10 seasons had become the public face of home improvement television in America. But there was a problem hiding inside the way public television worked, and Vila was walking straight toward it. PBS shows are funded by a combination of viewer donations, foundation grants, and corporate underwriting. The underwriters for this old house included some of the biggest names in home improvement retail, companies like Home Depot, and the lumber supplier Weyerhaeuser. These sponsors weren't just writing checks because they liked television. They were underwriting a show that their customers watched, and they expected the people on camera to maintain a clean, unaffiliated image. Vila had a different idea. His salary from the show was modest by any standard, somewhere between $200 and $800 per episode, depending on the season. He had a nationally recognized name, a face that American homeowners trusted, and a growing appetite for the kind of income that public television simply couldn't provide. So he started taking commercial endorsement deals on the side. For years, WGBH and producer Russell Morash allowed it, as long as Vila kept his commercial partners at arm's length from the show itself. But in 1989, Vila was approached by a company called Roku, a home improvement chain owned by Supermarkets General Corporation, and a direct regional competitor to Home Depot. Vila signed the deal. Home Depot found out. Weyerhaeuser found out. Both companies pulled their underwriting from the show. WGBH faced a funding crisis, and Morash faced a choice. Vila, by various accounts, was either fired or quit. The two sides have never fully agreed on what happened in that final conversation. What's documented is that when season 11 began production, Bob Vila was not in it. He was replaced almost immediately by a man named Steve Thomas, and the show barely missed a beat. Here's what the comments kept asking, and here's the answer they never got, until now. The commercial deal that ended Bob Vila's time on this old house looked, in the moment, like a scandal. But what it actually revealed was a tension that would follow the show for the next 30 years. This old house was built on public television principles. No advertising, No commercial entanglements. Content driven by education rather than sales. But it was also wildly popular, reaching millions of households, and popularity on that scale eventually attracts money whether you want it to or not. After Vila left, the show's producers worked hard to keep that commercial firewall intact. Steve Thomas hosted from 1989 through 2003, spanning 14 seasons. And his tenure was notable for expanding the show's reach without expanding its appetite. Thomas won an Emmy for Outstanding Service Show Host in 1998, a recognition of what the show was, not just what it had been. But Vila himself took a different path. He walked away from public television's restrictions and built exactly the commercial career the PBS model had prevented. By the late years of his PBS run, he had already been pulling in up to $500,000 per year from outside endorsements. After This Old House, he launched a rival show called Home Again, which ran until 2007 and spent the following decades as one of the most aggressively marketed handyman brands in American advertising. The irony is that what got Vila fired eventually became the industry standard. By the time HGTV launched in 1994 and turned home improvement into an entertainment genre, the idea of hosts being paid corporate endorsement money was not controversial. It was the entire business model. Vila had just arrived 15 years too early. Meanwhile, This Old House entered the 1990s with a new host, a new energy, and a fundamental question it hadn't yet answered. How long could a nonprofit-funded home improvement show survive in a media world that was rapidly becoming all about profit? Most people who know this story stop here. But the real story starts right now. The year 2001 marked the end of an era that most longtime viewers didn't notice at the time, because nothing about the show's look or cast changed. WGBH, the Boston PBS station that had produced This Old House since the very first episode in 1979, sold the television assets to Time Inc. Time took those assets and formed a new company called This Old House Ventures, which also held the show's magazine, launched in 1995, and its growing website. For the first time in its history, This Old House was a for-profit commercial property. The sale made business sense for both sides. WGBH got to focus on its core public broadcasting mission without managing a complex commercial media franchise. Time Inc. got ownership of one of the most trusted brand names in American home improvement, a brand that had been built over 22 years entirely on the credibility that public television gave it. The show kept airing on PBS. The funding still came from underwriters. The format didn't change. And in 2003, when Steve Thomas stepped down after 14 seasons, the production team found a replacement host through what may be the most unusual casting story in American home improvement television. Kevin O'Connor was not a contractor. He was not a carpenter or a builder or a tradesman of any kind. He was a banker, specifically a venture capital professional, who had first appeared on This Old House as a homeowner, allowing the show to document a renovation of his own family's property. The producers noticed how naturally he worked in front of the camera. When the hosting position opened up, they came back to him. He has been the face of the show ever since. And that decision, to make a former banker the host of America's most respected home improvement program, turned out to be one of the most quietly brilliant choices in the show's history. And that's when the decision was made, the one nobody around her saw coming. If the host changed, the carpenter stayed. Norm Abram was there on the first day of filming in Dorchester in 1979. He was there when Bob Vila left. He was there when Steve Thomas took over. He was there when Kevin O'Connor stepped in. He built cabinets and framed walls and crafted staircases and installed trim on house after house, in city after city, across 4 decades. And by the time his run finally ended, he had appeared in more episodes of This Old House than any other person in the show's history. 947 episodes. Abram became the quiet constant of the show. The man who didn't host, didn't drive the narrative, didn't get into sponsorship disputes or contract renegotiations. He just worked. He showed viewers exactly what craftsmanship looked like at the highest level. And he did it with the same methodical precision in season 43 that he'd brought to season 1. His other show, The New Yankee Workshop, ran on PBS from 1989 to 2009 and gave him a second platform to do exactly what he did best: build things slowly, correctly, while explaining every step to a camera. When Abram retired in 2022, after 43 years, the show produced a 1-hour tribute special called The House That Norm Built, which aired on PBS on October 3rd of that year and streamed on the Roku channel. The special featured archived footage, interviews from people across the industry, and tributes from celebrities who had grown up watching him work. The vice president of This Old House at Roku called him a living legend and said entire networks existed because of the trust he had built with generations of homeowners. That statement, entire networks, points directly to what This Old House became in the decades after its founding. It didn't just produce a television show, it created the template for an entire genre. HGTV, DIY network, every home renovation competition format that fills cable schedules today. All of it traces back, in one way or another, to a camera crew in a Boston neighborhood in 1979. What happened next is the reason this story spread across the internet. In March 2021, This Old House Ventures was sold again. The buyer was Roku, at the time better known as a streaming device company than a content studio, and actively building out its library of original and acquired programming through the Roku channel, its free, ad-supported streaming platform. The price was $97 and $8 million in cash. To put that in context, 2 months before the This Old House deal closed, Roku had also purchased the entire content library of Quibi, the high-profile short video streaming platform that had collapsed after just 6 months in operation, for a figure that was reported to be significantly less than $100 million. A single home improvement franchise that started in a Dorchester row house was worth more to Roku than the entire remaining output of a platform that had raised $1.75 billion in venture capital. The terms of the deal were structured carefully. This Old House would continue airing on PBS first, maintaining the public television relationship the brand had always had. New episodes would then become available free on the Roku channel every Monday, without a subscription requirement. The entire streaming library would live on Roku, alongside a classic channel dedicated to the show's early years, including the original Bob Vila seasons. What the sale actually represented was a bet, by one of Silicon Valley's major players, on the durability of expertise-based content in an era dominated by personality-driven streaming. Roku wasn't buying a host or a celebrity or a social media following. It was buying a brand that had spent 42 years telling American homeowners the truth about how their houses worked. And that bet looked very good almost immediately. By the time the acquisition was completed, This Old House and Ask This Old House were the two top-rated home improvement programs in the United States. At this point in the story, most people walked away. What the show did instead is the part nobody talks about. In September 2024, Hurricane Helene made landfall on the Florida Gulf Coast as a Category 4 storm. Then it moved inland. By the time it reached western North Carolina, Helene had not weakened the way most hurricanes do when they travel over land. The mountains funneled its moisture into catastrophic flash floods. Mudslides swallowed roads. Rivers rose 20, 30, 40 feet in hours. Asheville, a city set in the Blue Ridge Mountains that had never been a hurricane destination, a place where people moved precisely because it felt safe and elevated and removed from coastal weather, was devastated. 36 people died in Florida from the initial landfall. In North Carolina, the death toll was far higher, and the destruction was harder to comprehend because it happened in places that weren't supposed to flood. This Old House made a decision. Season 47, which premiered in September 2025, did not feature a standard renovation project. The crew traveled to Asheville instead, and spent the season documenting the rebuilding of 5 families' homes across 3 different neighborhoods, 3 1920s and 1930s bungalows, a 1960s ranch house, and a 2006 modular home. All of them had been destroyed or severely damaged by the storm. The season was titled Carolina Comeback. Meteorologist Stephanie Abrams appeared early in the season to explain why a Category 4 Atlantic hurricane had caused catastrophic flooding in a mountain city 200 miles from the nearest coast. A piece of educational content that went beyond renovation and into something the show had always done best, explaining how things work and why they fail, in language that treated the audience as intelligent adults. In October 2025, the crew filmed a homecoming episode, revisiting the families to document where their rebuild stood. That episode aired in January 2026. Kevin O'Connor, Tom Silva, Richard Trethway, and Jen Nawada were all on site, the same core team, still working, still showing up. She never talked about this publicly, until now. There is a version of this story that treats This Old House as a media property, something that was created, sold, resold, and eventually absorbed by a streaming platform, with hosts coming and going, and ownership structures changing every few decades. That version is technically accurate and completely misses the point. What This Old House actually built over 47 seasons was something rarer than a TV show. It built a teaching relationship with the American public, a consistent, reliable place where people who owned old houses could learn what those houses needed, how the systems inside them worked, and what it actually took to restore something rather than tear it down and start over. The first house was a $17,000 Victorian in a Boston neighborhood that a lot of people had already given up on. Norm Abrams showed up on the first day of filming with his tools, and he kept showing up for 43 years. 3 different hosts came and went. Ownership changed hands 3 times. The platform shifted from local television to national PBS, to Time Inc., to Roku. The show stayed. By 2025, it had broadcast 1,196 episodes and won 20 Emmy Awards. It had survived a founding host's departure under a sponsorship scandal that would have killed a lesser franchise. It had outlasted the network that created it, the publishing company that commercialized it, and the streaming wars that consumed most of the content produced in the same era. And in its 47th season, it went to Asheville and spent a full year helping 5 families rebuild their homes after the worst natural disaster to hit western North Carolina in living memory. That is not the story of a television show. That is the story of something that decided very early what it was, and then refused to be anything else. Plus, the real story of this old house is not about who owned it, or who hosted it, or how much Roku paid for it. It is about what happens when a piece of content decides that its only job is to be useful, and then holds that position for nearly half a century, through every disruption the media industry threw at it. The show is currently in its 47th season, helping rebuild hurricane-damaged homes in Asheville, North Carolina, with the same crew that has been showing up for decades. New seasons continue to air on PBS and stream free on the Roku channel. The magazine and website still run. The teaching relationship with the American homeowner is still intact. The next chapter looks like more of the same, which, given everything this show survived, might be the most remarkable thing about it. Bob Vila built a career on commercial deals. Norm Abrams built 43 years of quiet mastery. Kevin O'Connor, a former banker who walked onto a job site and never left, is still the host. Here's the question worth sitting with. Do you think this old house sold out when Roku bought it for $97.08 million? Or did finding the right owner at the right moment actually save a 45-year institution from disappearing entirely?